All right, Shalom. First, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah, Kodash. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. All right, today I just wanted to go through the book of Daniel, the 11th chapter. All right, and not going to go through the whole chapter in this video. All right, but we'll see how far we get through it. Okay, because Daniel, the 11th chapter, goes into a lot of history. Okay, and so Lord's willing, this be edifying. All right, and let's get right into it. So this is Daniel chapter 11, verse 1. It says, also I, and this is basically an angel speaking, okay? And it says here, all right, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, so basically the angel is basically talking to Daniel, okay? And the reason it said, all right, that I stood to confirm and to strengthen him, all right, was to basically, keep in the right direction to fulfill, the will of the Lord, basically. Okay, when you read in Daniel the 10th chapter, all right, it basically talks about how the angels work on the minds of men. Okay, so it says, verse 2, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Okay, now it says, I'm going to read it from the top again and break it down. It says, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. So he said, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. That means they are to come. Now, when we go into these 3 kings, all right, we start with Cambyses the second. Okay, I have a chart up here actually. Okay, now you would think it's Cyrus, but it's not, because in the time, okay, in the time of Darius's basically ruling, Cyrus was the king, okay, and Darius was basically a ruler under him. Okay, so Cyrus was already ruling at this time, so that's why he says they shall stand up, meaning after, okay, and then the person who ruled after Cyrus, okay, was Cambyses the second, as you can see here. You had Cyrus, Cambyses, Salakia. This was Cyrus the first, Cambyses the first, and then you had Cyrus. This is the Cyrus that we know of, okay? The one who gave the decree for us to rebuild the temple. And then you had his son Cambyses the second, and then his other son Bardia or Smerdis, and then you had Darius the first. Okay, so those are the well, let's read it. So it says, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. So now starting off with Cambyses the first, okay, or Cambyses the second, keep saying first. All right, Salakia. Cambyses the second, it says here, was the second king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire from 530 to 522 BC. He was the son and successor of Cyrus the Great, and his mother was Casandane. Okay, now this Cambyses, all right, the second, it was during his reign or his rule that the temple was halted. All right, the building of the temple was halted. Okay, now let's go to that. This is Ezra chapter 4, because Cyrus gave the decree for us to rebuild the temple. But as we were building it, these heathens, all right, and our adversaries basically came to trouble us with the building. When you read the whole chapter of Ezra 4, it tells you that. And ultimately, what did they do? They wrote a letter, okay, to the king, and the king at the time was Cambyses. People say it might have been Smerdis, all right, but we know it was from the time frame of Cambyses to Smerdis, because it wasn't until Darius came on the scene before we were commissioned to continue building again. So it says, and I commanded, and search hath been made, and it is found that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made therein. There have been mighty kings also over Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, and toll, tribute, and custom was paid unto them. All right, so hold up. That means, you know what I'm saying, during the time, and when was that? All right, it had to be around the time of King David, all right, and King Solomon, because we were on top. When you look up around that time period, okay, around the late of 10th century, okay, early ninth century, it tells you how the whole, like, basically when you look in the history of these other empires, it was basically like a dark moment. Why? Because none of them were in rulership. We were in rulership. All right, so it says, verse 41, give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease, and that the city be not builded until another commandment shall be given from me. And this is when they halted, all right, the building of the temple. Take heed, take heed now that ye fail not to do this. Why should damage grow to the king's hurt, or to the hurt of the kings? Now, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem unto the Jews and made them to cease by force and power. Now, notice it says King Artaxerxes, right? But we're dealing with Cambyses. Why? Because Artaxerxes or Xerxes was just a Greek way, all right, of referring to these different kings. So sometimes they would be talking about, a different Persian, Persian king or Persian ruler, and it might say Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus. It doesn't necessarily mean that every time you see Artaxerxes, it's talking about Ahasuerus from the book of Esther. Okay, if you don't understand that, you might get confused with certain precepts because you'll say, hold on, Artaxerxes, what? So it says, verse 24, then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. That means when this commandment was given, and this was after Cyrus, okay, after Cyrus had died, and basically his son Cambyses had taken over, they halted that building all the way until, all right, after his rulership and after him until Darius. Now, he's not really significant, all right, because as you can see, Darius came to rulership in 522, the same year that Cambyses died. So Bardia never really got to rule. Okay, it was only for a few months, which we'll go into that. So you going back to Daniel 11, it talks about there shall stand up yet three kings in Persia. All right, you had Cambyses the second, okay, and then after him you had Bardia, okay, which it says here, Bardia, also known as Smerdis among the Greeks, possibly died in 522 BC, was the son of Cyrus the Great and the younger brother of Cambyses II, both Persian kings. There are sharply divided views on his life. Bardia either ruled the Achaemenid Empire for a few months in 522 BC, or was impersonated by a magus called Gaumata until he was toppled by Darius the Great. Okay, so basically they're saying there's speculation that it was either the actual son of Cambyses who ruled, or he was basically murdered and impersonated by a magus called Gaumata. Okay, but nonetheless, he was the second. Okay, so you had, going back to Daniel 11, all right, there shall stand up yet three kings in Persia. The first, okay, was Cambyses the second. The second was Bardia, and the third was Darius. Okay, not Darius the Mede, okay, but Darius the Persian. I believe his name was Histhiopes or something along those lines. All right, but when we get to him, we'll find out. So this was Bardia. Now after Bardia, you had Darius. They call him Darius the Great. Okay, I wanted to see if his name is gonna. All right, it's not popping up, but I believe it started with a H. Um, yeah, it started with an H. I think it was like his thigh piece, his stats piece, something along those lines. So anyway, it says here, Darius the First, commonly known as Darius the Great, was the third Persian king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire, reigning from 522 BCE until his death in 486 BCE. He ruled the empire at its peak when it included much of West Asia, parts of Caucasus, parts of Balkans, Thrace, Macedonia, and Paeonia, most of the Black Sea coastal regions, Central Asia as far as the Indus Valley, in the Far East, and portions of North and Northeast Africa, including Egypt, Eastern Libya, and coastal Sudan. It says Darius ascended the throne by overthrowing the legitimate Achaemenid monarch Bardia, whom he later fabricated to be an impostor named Gaumata. So if this is true, then we know that's where the story of Gaumata comes from. It says the new king met with rebellions throughout his kingdom and quelled them each time. A major event in Darius's life was his expedition to push Athens and Eretria, or to punish Athens and Eretria for their aid in the Ionian revolt and subjugate Greece. This is important, all right, because this was basically what led to the first Persian invasion of Greece. All right, now the Ionian revolt, as we can read here, it says the Ionian revolt and associated revolts in Aeolus, Doris, Cyprus, and Caria were military rebellions by several Greek regions of Asia Minor against Persian rule, lasting from 499 BC to 493 BCE. At the heart of the rebellion was the dissatisfaction of Greek cities of Asia Minor. So these Greek city-states that were under subjection, all right, to the Persians, were starting to revolt and rebel. Okay, and ultimately the rebellion got quelled, but Darius wanted to punish, all right, two main cities, Athens and Eretria, for aiding in the revolt, and that's what led to the first Persian invasion of Greece. It says, although ultimately ending in failure at the Battle of Marathon, Darius succeeded in the resubjugation of Thrace, expansion of the empire through the conquest of Macedon, the Cyclades, and the islands of Naxos, and the sacking of the city of Eretria. Now notice how it says Darius ascended the throne by overthrowing the legitimate Achaemenid monarch, because Darius wasn't from the line of Cyrus. He wasn't his direct descendant. Okay, when you go back to Cyrus II, his father Cambyses I, and his father Cyrus I, the line that Darius comes from, all right, his Darius is what? Father, grandfather, great grandfather, Ariarmenes was the brother, all right, of Cyrus's grandfather. So Darius didn't come from the same line as Cyrus. That's why technically Darius wasn't next in succession here. So he overthrew him. You could call him a usurper because technically he wasn't, a descendant, okay, of Cyrus. All right. So anyway, like we read, it says, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. All right, we just read those 3 kings, which started with Cambyses II, all right, followed by Bardia, followed by Darius, okay, and it says, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And that 4th was Xerxes, okay, or as we know him as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. And this was the son of Darius. Okay, now it says Xerxes the first, commonly known as Xerxes the Great, was the 4th king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire. Okay, as we read here, the 4th king. It says here, ruling from 486 to 465 BC. He was the son and successor of Darius the Great, and his mother was Atossa, a daughter of Cyrus the Great, the first Achaemenid king. Like his father and predecessor Darius I, he ruled the empire at its territorial apex. When you read in the book of Esther, it tells you he had about, if I'm not mistaken, 127 provinces. So he was very rich. It says he ruled from 486 BC until his assassination in 465 BC at the hands of Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard. Xerxes I is notable in his Western history for his failed invasion of Greece in 480 BC. All right, his forces temporarily overran mainland Greece north of the Isthmus of Corinth until losses at Salamis and Placia a year later reversed these gains and ended the second invasion decisively. Now, this is what we're reading about, because Darius, all right, Darius, okay, he started the first Persian invasion of Greece, as we read. All right, but that wasn't too successful. So he planned another invasion of Greece. However, he died before he could accomplish it. Hence, his son Xerxes I, or Ahasuerus, was the one who was going to carry out the second Persian invasion of Greece. All right, and during that time is when you have the Battle of Thermopylae with the Spartans. All right, where you get the movie The 300 from. That was during the second Persian invasion of Greece. That's why it says, "And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia." And that was the second Persian invasion of Greece. But as we read, he didn't succeed. All right. It says, however, Xerxes successfully crushed revolts in Egypt and Babylon. Roman Gershman says that after this he ceased to use the title of king of Babylon, calling himself simply king of the Persians and the Medes. Xerxes also oversaw the completion of various construction projects at Susa and Persepolis. Xerxes is identified with the fictional king Ahasuerus in the biblical book of Esther. That book is broadly considered to be fictional, which, once again, that's just Esau and his propaganda. All right, we believe the book is real. Now, continuing on, it says, "And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will." So now, from verse 2 to verse 3, just jumped a good couple hundred years, because the second Persian invasion of Greece, all right, or you could even say after the rulership of Xerxes, because it says Xerxes reigned till about 465. Now, when you jump down onto verse 3, this mighty king is talking about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great didn't come on the scene till about 330, 336-ish, all right, BC. All right, so that's from 465 to 336. Okay, that's the period, the time jump between verse 2 and verse 3. Okay, it says, "And a mighty king shall stand up," which was Alexander the Great, "and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will." Where can we find this? All right, let's go to it. This is the book of First Maccabees. Okay, First Maccabees, the first chapter. It says, "And it happened that after that Alexander the son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius the king of the Persians and Medes." Now this is Darius the third, the last king of the Persians. It says, "And he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, in so much that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up." All right, as we read here, he shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Now it says, verse 4, "And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those." So let's finish off in First Maccabees. It says, okay, verse 4. "And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive." This was, you can look it up, the partition of Babylon. It says, "So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth." Okay, so when we read Daniel 11 and 4, and it says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided towards," pardon the noise in the background, once again, Satan being a demon. It says, "And shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven." That was his kingdom being parted amongst his generals. Now, we know about the four main generals who were last standing at the end, but Alexander had more than four generals. When you look up the wars of the Diadochi, that is the wars of Alexander's generals, all right, or his successors. And that's where you find out how, they fought amongst themselves, and it ended up, with the four that we know today. Now it says, "And not to his posterity," because those people that ruled after Alexander, were not his descendants. All right, they weren't his sons. They were some were his friends. All right, and some were generals that ruled under him. It says, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, because Alexander's dominion was based on Pan-Hellenism. Pan meaning all, Hellen is Greek. He wanted all Greek. All right, basically everything united under Greeks. Okay, but his generals had a different idea. It says, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for those beside those. So those four generals, all right, were Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Okay, those were the ultimate four generals. Verse 5. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So what's happening in verse 5 is now we're shifting the focus, all right, towards the east, and we're focusing on the area of, let's see, let me pull up a diagram. Let's say Seleucid Empire map, for example. Okay, let's look at this. So what's going on here, all right, is that you have this whole area, right? Ptolemy had this portion. I believe Lysimachus had this portion, and Cassander had this portion right here, and Seleucus had this portion right here. So verse 5 is now, we're ignoring this part, and we're focusing mainly on this area, all right, the Near East, or the Levant area, all right? So the king of the south is now talking about who? Ptolemy. And the king of the north is talking about Seleucus. Okay, so Daniel 11 and 5 says, the king of the south shall be strong. And the king of the south here is talking about Ptolemy the first, Soter, which Soter means savior. It says, and one of his princes, all right, and that's talking about Seleucus the first, Nicator. Now, when you look up the word prince, all right, is Shar, okay, and it says here, prince, ruler, leader, chief, chieftain, official. It says what? Captain, general, commander. Okay. Now, when you look up Seleucus, it says here, one of the contents under Seleucus the first was what? His admiralship, all right, under Ptolemy. Okay. Now let's look up the word admiral is what? A commander or a fleet of or naval squadron or a naval officer of a very high rank, because at one point Seleucus was under Ptolemy the first. Okay, he was, like it says, his general or his admiral. Okay, so this says, and one of his princes, which was Seleucus the first, Nicator, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. And now when you pull this up, you notice how Seleucus had a very, very, very big, okay, dominion in comparison to all the rest of the generals. All right, because Seleucus' dominion involved or included his plus a part of Antigonus, who was one of the previous people during the wars of the Diadochi. It included all this area right here. Okay, and what we're going to focus on is the Syrian wars, the 6 Syrian wars, which were basically fought over this area right here, and there were constant wars between. When we read about the king of the north, it's talking about the Seleucids, and when we read about the king of the south, it's talking about the Ptolemies. Okay, so let's read it. So we read verse 5, verse 6. And in the end of years, they shall join themselves together for the king's daughter. Now, before I even keep reading, once again, we've jumped. Okay, in verse 5, we were talking about Ptolemy the first, Soter, and Seleucus the first, Nicator. In verse 6, we're already in the midst, all right, of the Syrian wars. Okay, let me close out a few of these tabs. All right, I already got this. Okay, I already got this right here. So the Syrian wars, right? When you look up the Syrian wars, it says the Syrian wars were a series of 6 wars between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, successor states to Alexander the Great's empire during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, over the region then called Coal Syria, one of the few avenues into Egypt. These conflicts drained the material and manpower of both parties and led to their eventual destruction and conquest by Rome and Parthia. It says these are briefly mentioned in the biblical book of Maccabees. So now it says, In the wars of the Diadochi, following Alexander's death, Coele-Syria initially came under the rule of Antigonus I, Monophthalmus. In 301 BC, Ptolemy I Soter, who 4 years earlier had crowned himself king of Egypt, exploited events surrounding the Battle of Ipsus. The Battle of Ipsus was the battle in which Seleucus, Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus teamed up and basically took out Antigonus. And then they split up whatever was left amongst themselves. So it says Ptolemy took advantage, all right, of basically, the dust clearing, all right, and took control of the region of what? Of Coele-Syria. The victors at Ipsus, however, had allocated Coele-Syria to Ptolemy's former ally, Seleucus I Nicator, founder of the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus, who had been aided by Ptolemy during his ascent to power, did not take any military action to reclaim the region. Once both were dead, however, their successors became embroiled in war. All right, and that's what we're going to read about. So the First Syrian War says a decade into his rule, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, all right, and this was the son of Ptolemy I, faced Antiochus I Soter, and Antiochus I Soter was the son of Seleucus I Nicator, the Seleucid king, who was trying to expand his empire's holdings in Syria and Anatolia. Ptolemy proved to be a forceful ruler and skilled general. In addition, his recent marriage to his court-wise sister Arsinoe, the second of Egypt, had stabilized the volatile Egyptian court, allowing Ptolemy to successfully carry out the campaign. The First Syrian War was a major victory for the Ptolemies. Antiochus took the Ptolemaic-controlled areas in coastal Syria and southern Anatolia in his initial rush. Ptolemy reconquered these territories by 271 BC, extending Ptolemaic rule as far as Caria and into most of Cilicia. With Ptolemy's eye focused eastward, his half-brother Magus declared his province of Cyrenia to be independent. It would remain independent until 250 BC. Okay, it says, then it was reabsorbed into the Ptolemaic kingdom, but not before having triggered a sequence of Ptolemaic and Seleucid court intrigues, war, and ultimately leading to the marriage of Theos, which was Antiochus II, all right, and Berenice. So now we're going to read about the Second Syrian War. This is what Daniel 11:6 is talking about. When it says at the end of years, they shall join themselves together, that's talking about at the end of the Second Syrian War. It says, Antiochus II, Theos, all right, which means God, succeeded his father in 261, and thus began a new war for Syria. So the Syrian Wars, as it says in the title, was over that portion of Coele-Syria, that land. It says he reached an agreement with the current Antigonid king of Macedon, Antigonus II Gonatas, who was also interested in pushing Ptolemy II out of the Aegean. With Macedon's support, Antiochus II launched an attack on Ptolemaic outposts in Asia. It says, this is I don't need to read this part. It's a lot of reading, but we're just gonna hit the main point that relates to Daniel 11. It says the war was concluded. All right, the Second Syrian War was concluded around 253 BC with the marriage of Antiochus to Ptolemy's daughter Berenice Syra, which means dowry bearer. Antiochus repudiated his previous wife Laodice and turned over substantial domain to her. He died in Ephesus in 246 BC, poisoned by Laodice, according to some sources. Ptolemy II died in the same year. This is what we're reading about in verse 6, and I'm going to explain. It says here, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together. And this was the end of the Second Syrian War. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, and that agreement was made by marriage. The king of the south, which was Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, gave his daughter, Berenice Syra, all right, to the king of the north, which was Antiochus II, Theos, and they made an agreement and a peace deal to end the war. It says, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So what happened was eventually, because in order for Antiochus to marry Ptolemy's daughter, he basically left his previous wife Laodice, okay, and then married Berenice. Now, after a while, Antiochus decided to go back to Laodice, which, as we read, she was salty and ended up, having him poisoned, okay. And now, being that Antiochus was dead, guess who was left? Berenice and Laodice, two wives of the dead Antiochus, okay. Now, each of them were saying that, look, my son is the rightful heir. My son is supposed to be the true king. And there was a back and forth. Eventually, what ended up happening was Laodice and her conspirators had Berenice killed, and her child was also killed. Okay, so it says, neither shall he stand, or is that she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand. Antiochus died, but she shall be given up. She died, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, which was her father, he also died, and he that strengthened her in these times. Verse 7. But out of a branch of her roots, so one of her family members, shall stand up one in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them and prevail, and shall prevail. Now, this branch of her roots that shall stand up in his estate is talking about Ptolemy III Euergetes. He was the brother of Berenice, who had just been killed. So let's read about that. The Third Syrian War, and this was the cause for the Third Syrian War. It says the Third Syrian War, 246 BC to 241, also known as the Laodicean War. All right, the Third Syrian War began with one of many secession crises that plagued the Hellenistic states. Antiochus II left two ambitious mothers, his repudiated wife Laodice and Ptolemy II's daughter Berenice Syra. In a competition to put their respective sons on the throne, Laodice claimed that Antiochus had named her son heir while on his deathbed, but Berenice argued that her newly born son was the legitimate heir. Berenice asked her brother Ptolemy III, which was Ptolemy III Euergetes, which means benefactor, all right, the new Ptolemaic king, to come to Antioch and help place her son on the throne. When Ptolemy arrived, Berenice and her child had been assassinated. Okay, it says Ptolemy declared war on Laodice's newly crowned son, Seleucus II. I believe this was Callinicus Pogan. Oh, yeah, yep, Callinicus Pogan. All right, in 246 BC, and campaigned with great success. His forces possibly being commanded by Xanthippus of Sparta, aka Xanthippus of Carthage, the mercenary general responsible for defeating a Roman army at Tunis. He won major victories over Seleucus in Syria and Anatolia, briefly occupying Antioch, and as a recent cuneiform discovery proves, even reached Babylon. So he was doing a lot of damage. All right. These victories were marred by the loss of the Cyclades to Antigonus Gonatas in the Battle of Andros. Seleucus had his own difficulties. So it says what? His domineering mother asked him to grant co-regency to his younger brother Antiochus Hyrax, as well as rule over Seleucid territories in Anatolia. Antiochus promptly declared independence, undermining Seleucus' efforts to defend against Ptolemy. So, what you have going on is Antiochus II Theos, who was the king, he died. And now there's a battle between his wife, all right, his ex-wife, which was Laodice, and his newly wife, which was Berenice. They were going back and forth saying, my son is the true king, my son is the true king. Berenice calls her brother, Ptolemy III Euergetes, to come and set up her son as the king, by force if need be. So Ptolemy says, okay. And when by the time Ptolemy gets there, he finds out his sister and her child are both dead. Instantly, he declares war on Laodice and her sons. Okay, and that's what we're reading about here. Now, as this war is going on, the older son, Seleucus II, is at war with Ptolemy, but yet his mother is now telling him, yo, you gotta, grant co-regency to your younger brother Antiochus Hyrax, da da da. Okay, he does it. Instead of his brother helping him fight against Ptolemy, his brother says, "Nope, I'm independent. You on your own, bro." All right. And this is what basically made it more difficult for Seleucus to fight against Ptolemy. And in turn, Seleucus ends up losing. So what happens when he loses? In exchange for a peace in 241, Ptolemy was awarded new territories on the northern coast of Syria, including Seleucia Pieria, the port of Antioch. The Ptolemaic kingdom was at the height of its power. So let's go back to Daniel. So Daniel 11 and 7, but out of a branch of her roots shall stand up one in his estate. This was talking about Ptolemy III Euergetes, which shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north. Why did he come there? Because his sister called him to come and help her set up her son as the king. When he got there, it says what? And shall deal against them and shall prevail. Why did he do that? Because he found out that his sister had been assassinated, so he declared war on them. And he won, as we just read. Cool. It says, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. This is why he was called Euergetes, aka benefactor. Okay. And ultimately, Seleucus died before Ptolemy Euergetes. So that's why it says he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Verse 9. Now, once again, keep in mind, this now jumps into the future. So now we're done dealing with Ptolemy the Third, Euergetes, and Seleucus and Berenice. We're done with them. Now we're moving on. Verse 9. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. Okay, he came into his own land. Cool. Verse 10. But his sons shall be stirred up. This is where it can get a little bit confusing. His sons is not talking about the sons of the king of the south. Because verse 10 sounds like a continuation. Oh, if the king of the south comes back and then his sons are stirred up. No. The sons here are talking about the sons of the king of the north. Okay? Or the sons of Seleucus II. Okay? And those were Seleucus III, Cyrannus, and Antiochus III the Great. Okay? As a matter of fact, let's look at it. Okay. So you had Antiochus the first, Soter, Antiochus the second, Theos, Seleucus the first, Callinicus, and then boom, Seleucus the third, Cyrannus. When you look at his sons, right, the sons of Seleucus the second were Antiochus the third, the Great, and Seleucus the third, Cyrannus. Okay, so those are the sons that shall be stirred up. Why? Because the Ptolemies had taken over majority of their land. So it says, they shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. Now, as this was happening, remember, there are two brothers, right? One of them died. That was Seleucus III, Cyrannus. So what was left was Antiochus III, the Great, and he was the one who assembled a multitude of great forces. It says, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So let's read about that. And this was the Fourth Syrian War. It says, upon taking the Seleucid throne in 233 BC, Antiochus III, this was one of the sons that was stirred up. Remember, his brother, all right, had died. It says, set himself the task of restoring the lost imperial possessions of Seleucus I Nicator, which extended from Greco-Bactrian kingdom in the east, the Hellespont in the north, and Syria in the south. By 221 BC, he had re-established Seleucid control over Media and Persia, which had been in rebellion. The ambitious king turned his eyes towards Syria and Egypt. Egypt had been significantly weakened by court intrigue and public unrest. The rule of the newly inaugurated Ptolemy IV Philopator. This was the son of Ptolemy III Euergetes. And Philopator means lover of father. Philo means love, pater means father. It says, began with the murder of Queen Mother Berenice II. The young king quickly fell under the absolute influence of imperial courtiers. His ministers used their absolute power in their own self-interest to the people's great chagrin. All right, which when you look that up, I believe it means dislike or displeasure. All right, there it is. Chagrin. Okay, it says distress, embarrassment, irritation, annoyance, vexation. All right, so they weren't with it. But anyway, Antiochus sought to take advantage of this chaotic situation. After an invasion in 221 BC failed to launch, he finally began the Fourth Syrian War in 219 BC. He recaptured Seleucia Pieria, as well as cities in Phoenicia, amongst them Tyre. So that's why we read it says, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come, that's Antiochus, all right, the third the great, and overflow and pass through. Okay, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So what? Let's read it. It says what? Okay, he captured these cities. It says, rather than promptly invading Egypt, Antiochus waited in Phoenicia for over a year, consolidating his new territories and listening to diplomatic proposals from the Ptolemaic kingdom. Meanwhile, Ptolemy's minister, Sosibius, began recruiting and training an army. He recruited not only from the local Greek population, as Hellenistic armies generally were, but because the Egypt was not just Edomites. You know, these Ptolemies we're reading about are Edomites, but you also had the native Egyptians that were there. So Sosibius, who was recruiting the army for Ptolemy IV, because war was coming, he didn't recruit only the Edomite Greeks, all right, but also from a native Egyptian. So he had a combination of Hamites and Edomites, all right, enrolling at least 30,000 natives as phalangites. The innovation paid off, but it would eventually have dire consequences for Ptolemaic stability. In the summer of 217 BC, Ptolemy engaged and defeated the long-delayed Antiochus in the Battle of Raphia, the largest battle since the Battle of Ipsus over 80 years earlier. Let's read about it. So Daniel 11 and verse 10 says, but his sons shall be stirred up. And that was Antiochus the third the Great and Seleucus the third Cyrannus. Remember, Seleucus the third ends up dying, so now you're just left with Antiochus the third the Great. It says, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So he came all the way ready, all right, to take over the territories of Ptolemy. Verse 11, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler. He was upset. He got angry. All right. And his general gathered the army. He says, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. So now you had the war between Ptolemy the fourth Philopator and Antiochus the third the Great. It says, and he shall set forth a great multitude, as we just read. His army was composed of not only native Egyptians, but also the Hellenistic Greeks. It says, set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. Okay, so you had that war that went on, and ultimately who ended up winning? Ptolemy. It says, and when he hath taken away the multitude, when he won, his heart shall be lifted up. Okay, so after Ptolemy the fourth won, okay, let's read about it here. It says, this innovation paid off, but it would eventually have, okay, we read that. Ptolemy's victory preserved his control over Coele Syria, and the weak king declined to advance further into Antiochus's empire, even to retake Seleucia Pieria. So all he cared about was just winning the battle so he can be left alone. He didn't go further and conquer more, all right, of Antiochus's land. The Ptolemaic kingdom would continue to weaken over the following years, suffering from economic problems and rebellion. Nationalist sentiments had developed among the native Egyptians who had fought at Raphia. Confident and well-trained, they broke from Ptolemy in what is known as the Egyptian Revolt, establishing their own kingdom in Upper Egypt, which the Ptolemies finally reconquered around 185 BC. Okay, so now let's keep reading. Verse 12, and when he have taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. Okay, and this was basically when Ptolemy had won. He was like, all right, it's lit, cool. It says, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. And ultimately what he did after he won was he started coming after us. Okay, you can read about that in Third Maccabees. Okay, yes, there is a book of Third Maccabees. All right, you can read about it. It's just history, and it goes into what Ptolemy did. Okay, and how he basically came after us. All right, and like it says, cast down many 10,000s, but shall not be strengthened by it. Why? Because ultimately, him doing that was gonna come and bite him in the ass. Okay, and basically, at the end of the day, he ends up dying, and because of the decision he made not to take over Antiochus's lands, that allowed Antiochus to do what? To recuperate and come back. We're gonna read about it in verse 13. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. Okay, so Antiochus, who lost, guess what? He didn't give up. And this is what? The Fifth Syrian War. So it says, the death of Ptolemy IV in 204 BC was followed by a bloody conflict over the regency as heir. Ptolemy V was just a child. Who was this, Epiphanes? Yep, Ptolemy V Epiphanes was just a child. The conflict began with the murder of the dead king's wife and sister, Arsinoe, by the magisters, or the ministers, Agathocles and Sosibius. The fate of Sosibius is unclear, but Agathocles seems to have held the regency for some time until he was lynched by a volatile Alexandrian mob. The regency was passed from one advisor to another, and the kingdom was in a state of monarchy, or anarchy. Wow. Seeking to take advantage of this turmoil, Antiochus III staged a second invasion of Coele Syria, as we read in Daniel 11 and 13, for the king of the north shall return. This was his second invasion. It says, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. So this time he came with more people. Let's read it. It says, Antiochus III staged a second invasion of Coele Syria. He convinced Philip V of Macedon to join the war and conquer the Ptolemy's territories in Asia Minor. So now he had not only his armies, but now the armies of Philip V of Macedon. It says, actions which led to the Second Macedonian War between Macedon and the Romans. Antiochus quickly swept through the region. After a brief setback at Gaza, he delivered a crushing blow to the Ptolemies at the Battle of Panium, near the head of the river Jordan, which earned him the important port of Sidon. Okay, and we're going to read that in here. So verse 13 says, for the king of the north, which is Antiochus III, the Great, shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. So he came back with a larger army, and he even came back allied with Philip V of Macedon. And shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and much riches. Verse 14, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. You had Antiochus, you had Philip V of Macedon. It says, also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Because you had sellout Israelites that actually joined, all right, the army, all right, and the side of Antiochus, and they basically helped them fight against Ptolemy. Okay, but at the end of the day, that's not the way, all right, for us to do, because they didn't stop there. When Epiphanes came into rulership, what did they do? These same wicked Israelites, all right, and their descendants went and sought permission from Antiochus to become Greeks. Okay. Slakia, pardon. Let me turn this off. Okay. Just give me 1 second. All right. So it says, verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and shall cast up a mount and shall take the most fenced cities. All right. And one of the fenced city was Sidon. Okay. So Antiochus took Sidon and then he made his way down. Okay. It says, and the arms of the south shall not withstand. Tyre and Sidon couldn't withstand. Neither his chosen people, we couldn't withstand. Neither shall there be any strength to withstand. All right. So with this great army, all right, that Antiochus brought, okay, he was able to take over. He took over Sidon, all right. He took over us, all right, and he took over the portions of Egypt, and nobody could stop him. Okay. Let me see if we've finished reading it in here. All right. So let's read just a little bit. All right, you know what? No, we're going to stop right here. Okay, we're going to stop right here at the Fifth Syrian War, Daniel chapter 11, verse 15. And because like I said, this is a long history. Okay, and Lord willing, if the Spirit permits, all right, I'll do another video continuing. Okay, but pretty much going to end it here. Like I said, it's a lot of history, you know, a lot of reading, a lot of secondary, primary characters, a lot of dates, events, times, all this, that, and the third. But hey, as the scriptures say, you got to study to show yourself approved unto the Most High. All right, you got to study to really understand these scriptures. So when people come out and now guess what? You ain't gonna learn this from Christianity. You know, they ain't gonna teach you this. Okay, but nonetheless, I hope you brothers and sisters and those who watch this video were edified. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakah, Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.